The night shift always smelled like metal and burnt coffee. Natasha shoved through the ER doors, sneakers squeaking on the floor, when the overhead speaker exploded. Code Blue Ambulance Bay. Repeat, Code Blue Ambulance Bay. She ran. 2 paramedics crashed through the sliding doors with a gurney, shouting, "Male 16 unresponsive. Found in an alley. Possible assault, possible fall." The boy on the stretcher looked even younger. Pale face streaked with blood. Designer shirt cut open and hanging off his shoulders. Natasha grabbed the side of the bed as they pushed into recess. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They lifted him onto the bed. Monitors oxygen for her hands moved on instinct. "Pulse," she called. "Thready 60. Pressure 70/40. Natasha, airway." Dr. Han snapped. She clamped the mask over the boy's face and squeezed the bag. His chest rose weakly. As she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, something on his wrist made her pause for half a heartbeat. A tattoo. A small black dragon curling around the inside of his wrist, the lines razor-sharp and expensive. Her stomach clenched. No. Please no. Everyone in Seoul's night shift knew that symbol. People with that dragon didn't wait in the ER waiting room. They arrived with bodyguards and left with problems handled. "Bruising on the ribs," one paramedic said. "Looks like multiple blows, not just a fall." "Order a CT, type and cross 4 units, Dr. Han said. "We may need surgery." For 3 breathless minutes the room was just sound and motion. Monitors screaming, orders flying, the boy's blood smeared on gloves and sheets. They pulled him back from the edge, at least for now. His heart rhythm steadied into a fragile beep beep beep. Only when they stepped back did Natasha see the rest of the picture. No wallet, no ID, just a cracked phone on the tray and that dragon staring up at her from his skin. Jiwoo, the senior nurse, appeared beside her. "Stable. For the moment," Natasha said. "He's a minor. We need a guardian. There's a phone." Jiwoo's gaze flicked to the tattoo and then away fast. "Let Dr. Han handle it. Hospital policy says we should." "Hospital policy doesn't want you disappearing," Jiwoo cut in softly. "Treat the body, forget the name. That's how you survive nights like this." She squeezed Natasha's shoulder and walked out, leaving the smell of perfume and fear behind. Natasha stared after her, jaw tight. That's why I left home, she thought. To stop being afraid of men with guns and names everyone whispered. She looked at the boy. Under all the money and ink, he was just a kid with a too-fast heartbeat and bruises that went deeper than his skin. The cracked phone buzzed on the tray. Natasha picked it up. The lock screen gave her one option. Emergency contacts. There was only a single name. Abe 0G. Father. No mom. No friend. Just father. Her thumb hovered above the screen. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard her mother's voice the night her brother died in a Lagos that smelled like diesel and bleach. Why didn't anyone call me sooner? Natasha swallowed. She opened a message window and typed, "Your son just came into my ER. He's in critical condition. Come quickly." Her heart pounded as she hit send. The message barely left the screen before the phone vibrated. "Keep him alive. I'm on my way." Another vibration. "No one must know he is there. Do you understand?" Cold slid down her spine. "Not thank you. Not please. Orders." She lifted her eyes. A hospital security guard had quietly taken position outside the room, pretending to study a clipboard. Down the hall, staff were already whispering. The air felt heavier, like the pressure right before a storm. Natasha looked from the door to the boy, then back to the glowing text. "No one must know he is there." Her pulse thudded loud in her ears. If she told the detectives when they came, she'd be crossing the most feared man in Seoul. If she kept quiet, she'd be hiding a possible criminal's son from the police. She realized suddenly that whoever was watching this night with her, from a chair in the waiting room, from a bed at home, from a subway train, was about to be dragged into that choice too. "If you were on this night shift with me," she murmured under her breath, "and the boy you just saved belonged to the city's most feared mafia boss, would you tell the police or protect him?" She set the phone down, feeling like she had just pulled the pin from a grenade and placed it on the bedside table. Then she straightened her shoulders, pasted on a professional face, and stepped into the corridor as the automatic doors at the main entrance hissed open. Somewhere out there, the man behind that dragon tattoo was already walking toward her. Natasha heard the main doors hiss open before she saw him. The ER's noise didn't stop. Monitors still beeped. A toddler still cried somewhere near triage, but something in the room's energy shifted. Conversations thinned. Heads turned without meaning to. Even the security guard outside the boys' room straightened his back, as if bracing for impact. Jiwoo reappeared at the nurse's station, lips pressed into a line. "He's here," she said quietly, without looking at Natasha. "Don't stare." So of course everyone stared. The man who stepped through the entrance didn't raise his voice, didn't shove anyone, didn't even move fast. He didn't need to. He walked like the entire building already belonged to him. Tall, dark coat over a black shirt, hands bare despite the winter air. Two men followed a half-step behind, their faces blank, eyes scanning, jackets hanging just loose enough to suggest hidden weight beneath. Natasha's first panic thought was that he looked normal, not like the monsters whispered about in break rooms. His face was sharply handsome, almost delicate, with the kind of bone structure that made people trust you before they knew better. Only his eyes betrayed him, flat and watchful, taking in exits, cameras, who was looking and who pretended not to. He ignored the reception desk completely, heading straight toward the recess corridor as if he had worked here for years. The security guard outside the boys' door tried to step into his path. "Sir, this area is restricted." The man stopped. He didn't touch the guard. He just looked at him. 1 second. 2. The guard swallowed, stepped aside. Natasha felt her heart slam against her ribs. This is him. He reached the door to the boys' room and finally paused, eyes flicking to the small whiteboard where someone had scribbled, "Male 16 unknown" in rushed handwriting. The corners of his mouth tightened. Then he turned his head and looked directly at her. It was so sudden she almost flinched. There were 6 people in the corridor, nurses, a doctor, a cleaner pushing a mop, but his gaze went straight through all of them and locked onto her, as if the earlier messages had painted a target on her forehead. "You," he said, voice low but perfectly clear. His Korean was smooth, controlled. "You texted me." Several people pretended to find the floor very interesting. Natasha swallowed. "I'm the primary nurse on his case, yes." He studied her for a beat, as though cataloging every detail. The dark coils of hair pulled back, the name tag that read Natasha Okafor, the tired but unflinching eyes. "Natasha," he read off her badge. On his tongue, her name sounded like a new currency being weighed. "Where is my son?" "Currently in imaging," she answered, keeping her voice as neutral as possible. "We stabilized him. He's being evaluated for internal injuries. As soon as he's back, you can see him." "I will see him now," the man said. The air seemed to dip in temperature. Natasha lifted her chin a fraction. "No, sir. While he is undergoing scans, no family is allowed in that area. Radiation safety rules. You can wait outside the CT suite doors and see him when they're done." One of his men shifted, ready to argue. The boss lifted a finger, and the man fell silent. Those cold eyes didn't leave Natasha's. "Do you know who I am?" She heard Jiwoo suck in a breath behind her. "Say no," a sensible voice whispered. "Pretend you don't. Let him have the illusion of power." "Yes," Natasha said instead. "I know who wears that dragon." Something flickered across his face, surprise then faint amusement. "And yet you tell me no." "In here," she said, nodding at the ward around them. "Everyone is just a patient. Your power stops at that door." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the distant beep of the CT machine down the hall. One of the bodyguards shifted his weight like he might step forward. The boss didn't move. He just watched her. Then to everyone's shock he smiled. It was a small thing, thin and sharp. "Good," he said softly. "If you were afraid of me, I wouldn't want you near my son." Jiwoo nearly dropped the chart she was holding. Natasha wasn't sure if her knees had gone weak from fear or relief. The boss turned slightly, glancing through the narrow window into the empty bed where his son had been. "What happened to him?" "We're still investigating," Natasha replied. "He was found in an alley. Signs of blunt force trauma. Possible head injury. We're checking for internal bleeding." His jaw worked. "Did he say anything?" She remembered the boy's panicked whisper. "If he comes here, someone will die." She also remembered his fingers gripping her wrist like a lifeline. He was disoriented, she said carefully. Mostly scared. He asked not to die. Something cracked in the man's expression. Just for a second. The thin smile vanished. His eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with something rawer and harder to look at. He is a foolish boy, he murmured, more to himself than to her. He thinks he is made of iron. He forgets that even iron can break. He lifted his gaze back to Natasha. You will tell me as soon as he returns from this scan. I do not like surprises. Neither do we, she said. He looked as if he was about to respond when two new voices cut down the corridor. Excuse us, ma'am. Detective Seo, Seoul Metropolitan Police. We need information on a possible suspect brought in from a gang-related altercation near the docks. Natasha turned. Two detectives approached, badges out, eyes sweeping the hall. They hadn't noticed the dragon yet, or they were pretending not to. Their steps slowed when they registered the dark coat and the silent bodyguards. The air thickened. Busy night, the boss said quietly, almost conversational. Tell me, Nurse Natasha, are they here for my son? Her heart thudded. The detectives stopped a few feet away. The older one, Detective Seo, nodded at her. We're looking for a young male mid-teens, possibly injured. Witnesses say he was taken from the scene in an ambulance. We need to verify his condition. Behind Natasha, Jiwoo shifted. Someone coughed. No one volunteered information. Detective Seo's gaze flicked between Natasha and the man beside her, clearly sensing a storm he didn't yet understand. Is that patient in your ward? He asked her. For a second, everything else fell away. The buzzing lights, the low hum of machines, Jiwoo's warning. The text still burning on the phone screen. Natasha could feel two futures hovering in front of her like overlapping images. In one, she told the detectives everything. The boy's name once she learned it, the injuries, the dragon tattoo. She would be a good nurse, a good citizen. She might also be the reason a mafia boss declared war on this hospital. In the other, she stalled. She hid him. She protected a stranger's son and by extension, the man whose message had made her throat go dry. Her pulse hammered. Beside her, the boss waited, expression unreadable. Detective Seo repeated slower. Is that patient in your ward? Natasha drew in a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. If someone were watching this night from home, she thought, they'd probably be yelling at the screen right now, choosing sides in their heads, turning this into a story about right and wrong. To them, she spoke silently. If you were on this night shift with me, and the boy you just pulled back from death belonged to the most feared man in Seoul, would you hand him to the police? Or pretend you never saw him? Her answer, she knew, would change everything. Natasha drew in a slow breath. Is that patient in your ward? Detective Seo asked again. Yes, she thought. No, she thought. Help him. Protect yourself. She met Seo's eyes. We've had several critical admissions tonight, she said, voice steady. I can't confirm anything without a name and proper paperwork. If you file the request, we'll cooperate. Seo's jaw flexed. He knew he was being stonewalled, but not by how much. Beside her, Kong said mildly, Detective, you wouldn't want this hospital sued for breaking confidentiality, would you? Let the staff do their jobs properly. Seo looked from one to the other, then slipped his badge back into his coat. We'll be back with a name, he said. And next time I expect clear answers. The detectives walked away, their footsteps echoing toward the exit. Natasha only realized she'd been holding her breath when her lungs burned. She exhaled slowly, heart pounding. She had just chosen. She hadn't handed the boy over. She'd protected him, protected Kang's son, from the police, even if only for a little while. Nothing in the ER looked different, but the entire night had shifted under her feet. Kong watched the door swing shut after the detectives, then turned to her with a look that was part calculation, part something like respect. You just stepped into my world, Nurse Natasha, he said quietly. Whether you meant to or not. Her palms felt damp inside her gloves, but her voice stayed firm. I stepped into his, she replied, nodding toward the room where his son lay. This is still a hospital. As long as he's my patient, that's the only side I'm on. Kang's mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but into something sharper. We'll see how long you can keep those sides separate. A distant alarm chimed from the CT suite, summoning the next wave of decisions. Natasha glanced once more at the boy's door, then back at the man who owned half the city's fear. And now, whether she liked it or not, a piece of her night. If you're staying with me, she thought, as if speaking to someone watching from a phone screen or a laptop in the dark, this is where the shift really starts. She squared her shoulders, turned toward the incoming gurney carrying the boy back from imaging, and walked forward, right into the storm. The gurney rattled back into the corridor, the teenage boy's body strapped down, his head immobilized in a foam cradle. The portable monitor beeped a nervous rhythm. Too fast, too fragile. CT's done, the tech called. Radiologist flagged something urgent. Dr. Han was already striding toward the nurse's station with the envelope of scans. Natasha, get him reconnected and prepped. We may be going straight to the OR. Got it, she said. Inside the room, she and another nurse moved like a practice machine, transferring the boy back to the bed, reconnecting 4 lines, checking his airway. Up close, the bruises on his ribs looked even worse, blooming dark under the harsh fluorescent light. You came back, kid, Natasha murmured, taping down a line. Now don't make me fight alone. For a moment his eyelids twitched. His fingers brushed her wrist in a weak accidental touch. Then he went still again. Outside she heard Dr. Han's voice go tight. Subdural hematoma, frontal lobe, significant mass effect. We need neurosurgery now. Natasha stepped out into the hall just as Han slammed the CT films onto the lightbox. The gray-white images glowed ghostly against the wall, the dark crescent of pooled blood pressing against the pale curve of the boy's brain. Kong stared at the scan, his face carved from stone. What does that mean? He asked. It means, Han said, choosing his words with care, your son has bleeding inside his skull. It's putting pressure on his brain. If we don't relieve that pressure soon, he could have permanent damage. Or worse. Kang's jaw clenched. Then operate. We need consent, Han replied. Surgery always carries risk. There's a chance he won't survive the procedure. Without it, there's a higher chance he won't survive the night. Kong didn't hesitate. I'll sign whatever you want. Han nodded briskly. We'll prepare the OR. Natasha, start pre-op meds and notify anesthesia. As she moved to obey, Natasha felt the night ratchet tighter around her. Surgery meant hours of uncertainty. Hours where the detectives could return. Hours where rivals might decide the hospital was the perfect place to finish what they'd started. She handed Kong the clipboard with the consent form. His hand was steady as he wrote his name, the pen biting hard into the paper. Nurse Natasha, he said quietly while he signed. I keep my promises. Remember that. She frowned. What promise? He finished the last stroke of his signature and tapped the pen against the page. You kept the police from dragging my son away in handcuffs before a doctor even saw his brain. His gaze lifted to hers. In my world, that is not a small thing. When this is over, there is something you want. Something that brought you to this country. I can help you find it. Her throat tightened. She hadn't told him about David. Not really. Just a few scattered details. Yet somehow, he'd heard the shape of her story and recognized it. Like a man who had ordered so many tragedies he could identify them by sound alone. I don't want anything from you, she said. He tilted his head, the faintest of smiles cutting across his mouth. Everyone wants something. Even good people. Before she could answer, the reporter arrived. Ready to transport, he said. They wheeled the boy out of the room, down the corridor toward the double doors marked operating theater. Natasha walked beside the bed, one hand on the rail, watching the numbers flicker on the monitor with every bump of the wheels. As they reached the doors, they swung open, and the sound inside spilled out. Clatter of instruments, the controlled chaos of a surgical team already moving into position. Family waits here, a scrub nurse told Kong, gesturing toward a small bench by the wall. Kong stopped, gaze locked on his son. For a second, the dragon tattoos and dark power fell away. And Natasha saw only a father who had no control over what happened next. He reached out and touched the boy's ankle. Just once, a brief squeeze through the blanket. Don't make me regret letting you live this long, he muttered, too low for anyone else to hear. Then he stepped back. The doors swung shut between them. Natasha lingered a moment, her own stomach twisting. Every fiber of her wanted to be inside, hands on the boy's body, helping hold death at bay. But her job was here now, keeping the outside from crashing in. As she turned, she caught a glimpse through the smaller window. The boy's head shaved in a strip, the surgeon marking a line on his skull. The sight sent a cold shiver down her spine. Brain surgery was always a gamble. For a 16-year-old whose enemies and law were both waiting outside, the stakes were obscene. She found Kong sitting on the bench like a man coiled on a throne made of cheap plastic. His bodyguard stood on either side, faces blank, eyes watchful. "How long?" he asked without looking at her. "Could be an hour. Could be 3, Natasha said. "Depends on what they find." 3 hours, he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of each. Plenty of time for trouble. She didn't argue. Down the corridor, 2 new shapes appeared near the entrance. Detective Seo and his partner back again, papers in hand. Of course. Natasha felt the next wave of the night rising toward her, dark and heavy. She glanced at Kong. His expression didn't change, but his fingers flexed once against his knee. "If you're still with me," she thought toward the invisible viewer in the dark. "We just pushed a boy into surgery, lied to the police, and made a soft deal with a crime lord, all in 1 hour. This is where nights like this decide who you really are." She squared her shoulders and stepped away from the bench, walking toward the detectives with her badge straight and her heartbeat loud, ready to fight for a boy on an operating table, and for whatever was left of her own conscience. Natasha met Detective Seo halfway down the corridor, before he could get a clear view of Kong waiting outside the OR. He held a clipboard this time, forms clipped to the front. "We've filed the request," he said. "Name and case number. Now will you tell me if our suspect is here?" Natasha took the papers, scanning quickly. A name was printed at the top. Kong Min-jun, male 16. Below it, a brief description of the incident near the docks. Fistfight that escalated, weapons possibly involved, one victim in critical condition at another hospital. Her eyes stuck on the surname, Kong. She didn't look back at the man on the bench, but his presence pressed between her shoulder blades like a hand. "Yes," she said slowly. "A patient matching this description was brought in." Seo's mouth thinned. "Condition?" "In surgery," she replied. "Severe head trauma. The doctors are trying to save his life." The younger detective shifted, sympathy flashing across his face before he masked it. Seo, however, didn't flinch. "We'll need to speak with him as soon as he's conscious," he said. "And we'd like to secure his room. For everyone's safety." Natasha folded the clipboard to her chest. "You can arrange that with hospital administration. But you need to understand something, detective. Right now he's not your suspect. He's a dying boy under anesthesia. If anything you do interferes with his care, I'll file my own report with names." Seo's gaze sharpened. "You choosing a side, nurse?" "I'm choosing a patient," she answered. "That's the only side I'm paid to be on." They stared each other down for a moment. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "We'll station 1 officer near the OR and 1 near the entrance. No questioning until the surgeon clears it." "Fair." "Fair," she said. He turned away to bark orders into his radio. The younger detective lingered a second. "Be careful," he murmured. "People around that family, accidents happen." Natasha's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Trust me, detective. I've already used my accident quota." He left to join his partner. When she turned back toward the OR, Kong was watching her. He hadn't moved from the bench, but his bodyguards had subtly adjusted positions, forming a loose wall between him and the approaching officers. "You gave them his name," he said. "I confirmed what your name on the consent form already told them," Natasha replied. "We're not erasing him from the system. That's not how this works." "You could have lied again," he said. "I could have," she agreed. "And then when they found out, and you'd lose any protection the hospital can pretend to offer. I'm not making you untouchable, Mr. Kong. I'm making sure your son survives long enough for you to be angry about paperwork." For a second he just looked at her. Then he laughed. A short, surprised sound that made the bodyguards flick their eyes toward him. "You speak to me like no one else does," he said. "Maybe you need more people who tell you the truth," she answered. He leaned back against the wall, studying the closed doors. Truth is a luxury in my world. In mine it's charted, she said. Every lie becomes a lawsuit. The waiting minutes stretched thick and slow. Monitors beeped on the other side of the doors, muffled. Nurses passed with medication trays. Somewhere in the hospital a baby cried. A life just beginning while this one balanced on a knife's edge. Natasha sat on a chair opposite Kong, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. She didn't pray often anymore, not in any organized way, but tonight she found herself whispering half-formed words in her head. Pleas for good hands and steady hearts in that operating room. After what felt like an hour but was probably 40 minutes, the doors finally swung open. Dr. Han stepped out, mask hanging around his neck, cap still on his head. His shoulders sagged with the weight of decision. Both Natasha and Kong stood at the same time. Well, Kong demanded. Han exhaled. We evacuated the hematoma, he said. The bleed was worse than we thought, but we managed to control it. He's stable for now. Natasha's lungs filled all at once. But, Kong pressed. Han hesitated. We won't know about neurological damage until he wakes up. He could be perfectly fine. He could have deficits, memory, movement, personality changes, or he might not wake for a while. Today was a very close call. Kang's face barely moved, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. Can I see him? He asked. Han glanced at Natasha. We'll move him to recovery first, then ICU. You can see him briefly when he's settled. Only one person at a time. I'll go prep the room, Natasha said. As she walked away, her heart still pounding, she felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The boy had made it off the table. That was the good news. The bad news was that survival meant everything outside the ER mattered again. Police, rivals, promises. In recovery, she checked his pupils, adjusted his ventilator, watched the numbers climb and dip on the screen. His face looked even younger without the lines of pain. Hair shaved in a neat strip with stitches peeking from beneath the bandage. You fought hard, she murmured. Don't stop now. When everything was as stable as it could be, she stepped back and signaled for Kong. He entered alone, leaving his shadows in the hall. For a moment he just stood there, looking at his son. At the tubes, the taped eyelids, the machines doing half his breathing. Natasha faded into the background, giving him what privacy a room full of technology allowed. Kong moved to the bedside and spoke in a low voice, Korean soft and fluid. You always wanted to be a man, he said. Tonight you tried to die like one instead of live like a boy. His hand hovered over his son's, then finally settled, fingers wrapping gently around the slack ones. I'm not done being angry with you, he said. So you don't have my permission to leave yet. Do you hear me? You disobey me on everything else. Don't disobey me on this. Natasha found herself looking away, the intimacy of the moment almost too much. When Kong finally released the boy's hand, his eyes were bright but dry. He turned to Natasha. We are not finished, you and I, he said quietly. When he wakes, I will keep my promise. She crossed her arms. And until then? Until then, he said. You keep him alive. I'll keep the wolves from the door. As if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Ji-woo. Police want to move an officer inside ICU. Admin is panicking. Also heard rumors someone from another crew is in the waiting room. Be careful. Natasha slipped the phone back. A wry thought forming in the back of her mind like a narration line. Code blue, brain surgery, cops, gangs, debt to a mafia boss. And it's only halfway through the shift. She looked from the boy to his father, then toward the corridor where uniforms and suits moved in cautious orbits around each other. If you're still here with me, she thought toward the unseen audience, this is where things stop being about one boy on a bed, and start being about what one night in this hospital will cost everybody. She straightened her badge, checked the boy's monitors one more time, and walked out to meet the next wave of trouble. The night was already rolling down the hall. Natasha stepped out of ICU into a corridor that felt like a border crossing. On one side, Detective Seo argued in low, sharp tones with a hospital administrator about reasonable access and public safety. On the other, two men in street clothes sat in the waiting room chairs, legs spread, jackets too heavy for the heated building, trying and failing not to look like muscle. In the middle, security hovered, unsure which storm they were supposed to hold back. Natasha walked straight to the nurse's station and pretended to be busy with the chart. It was a trick she'd learned early. People said more around you when you seem too occupied to listen. You can't block a public corridor, Seo was saying. We're not here to start a fight, we're here to prevent one. And we're responsible for patient privacy. The administrator replied, voice tight. If families complain that their relatives are being treated like criminals. Some of them are criminals, Seo snapped, then lowered his voice, glancing at the waiting room shadows. Which is exactly why you need us here. Natasha caught Jiwoo's eye as the older nurse passed by with a medication tray. See the tube by the window? Jiwoo whispered as she slipped a syringe into a pocket. Word is there with the crew that jumped the boss's son. Came to check on a cousin. Right. Why are they still here? Natasha asked. Because security doesn't get hazard pay, Jiwoo muttered. An admin doesn't want gang violence in hospital trending online. Natasha inhaled slowly. She had grown up around this kind of tension. The kind where everyone pretended nothing was wrong, while their eyes tracked every movement in the room. Back home, it had ended with shattered windows and sirens. Here she had machines that beeped and doors she could close, but the feeling was the same. Like standing in a church with gasoline pooled under the pews. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You kept your word. I'll keep mine. When he wakes, you and I will talk about your brother. She didn't need to see the name to know who had sent it. Natasha's thumb hovered over the keyboard. A dozen replies crowding her mind. Anger, questions, curses. In the end she typed nothing. She slipped the phone away. If she answered now, she'd be saying yes to a deal she wasn't ready to understand. A call from ICU saved her from deciding. Natasha? He's reacting. A nurse's voice crackled over the intercom. Pupils responsive. Try to wake. She was moving before the sentence finished. Inside the dim ICU room, the boy lay as before. Tubes, bandages, machines murmuring. But his eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling against his cheeks. Minjun, Natasha said, voice firm but gentle. It's Natasha. You're in the hospital. You had surgery. You're safe for now. His fingers twitched, his brow furrowed. Can you hear me? She asked. Squeeze my hand if you can. He squeezed, faint but intentional. Relief loosened something in her chest. Good. That's good. She checked his pupils, both narrowed properly under her penlight. I'm going to ask you a few questions, okay? Just nod or shake your head. He gave the tiniest nod. Do you know your name? She asked. Another faint squeeze. His lips moved around the ventilator tube. No words, but his eyes sharpened. Do you know where you are? Pause. Then a slow, small shake of the head. You're in a hospital in Seoul. You were hurt near the docks. She hesitated, then added, Your father is here. His heart rate spiked on the monitor. Hey, she soothed. Breathe with the machine. You're okay. His eyes darted toward the door, panic surfacing through the anesthesia fog. He tried to reach for her wrist. The restraints caught his hand. Don't, she said. You've got stitches in your head. You pull those and I'm the one who has to, so you back up. The corner of his mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh and couldn't. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Before surgery, you told me not to let him kill anyone. Do you remember that? His pupils dilated. A tear leaked from the corner of one eye. Slowly he nodded. Was he the one who hurt you? She asked. He squeezed her hand desperately, then shook his head with equal force. So not Kong. Not directly. Someone else then, she said. Someone from the docks? He blinked once, yes. And if he finds out who, there will be blood. Natasha finished quietly. 2 more blinks. Fast. Afraid. Natasha exhaled. Of course. The boy wasn't afraid of his father. Not exactly. He was afraid of what his father would do to whoever had put him on that operating table. You don't want a war, she said. You just wanted to live. His eyes filled again. She straightened, head buzzing. Out in the corridor, the pieces shifted in her mind. Kong waiting like a loaded gun. Rivals in the waiting room. Detectives circling like vultures, and this boy, the fuse between them. If Kong learned the truth the wrong way, people would die. If the police learned the truth without context, Minjun might never see outside of a cell again. And somewhere in that tangle, Kong held a key to the one mystery that had haunted Natasha since she'd been too young to pronounce the word coroner. She adjusted Minjun's blankets and brushed damp hair away from his forehead. "Sleep for now," she told him. "You survived the first half of the night. Let me handle the second." Back outside, Seo was waiting. "I heard he's waking," he said. "We'd like a few questions." "Too soon," Natasha said automatically. "He can barely nod. You'll get nothing useful and risk his recovery." "That's not your call," Seo replied. "Actually it is," she said. "Doctor's orders. No stress, no interrogation until he's cleared. You want to ignore that, you put it in writing." Seo's nostrils flared. "You're obstructing." "I'm protecting a post-op brain patient," she answered. "You want to question someone, start with the men who came to visit cousins and haven't moved from those chairs in an hour." His gaze flicked toward the waiting room, where the rival crew sat, pretending to scroll their phones. For a brief, satisfying moment, Natasha saw calculation in his eyes that had nothing to do with her. "We're already running their IDs," he said. "But make no mistake, Nurse Natasha, we'll be back for your patient." "I know," she said softly. "That's what I'm afraid of." When he walked away, she felt Kang's gaze on her again from down the hall. She met it across the distance. Two people bound now by a boy on a ventilator and a night that wouldn't end. If she had been telling this story out loud, to someone listening in the dark with earbuds in, she'd say, "This is the part of the night where saving a life was the easy part. The hard part is deciding what that life is allowed to turn into, and how much of yourself you're willing to trade to steer it." And somewhere beneath the fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, Natasha knew that when dawn finally crawled toward the hospital windows, she would not be the same woman who had walked into that code blue at midnight. From this point, you are already deep into Act 3 to 4 territory. So what you need is a clean bridge toward the end of episode cliffhanger. Natasha's deal with Kong about her brother, and the threat that follows her home. Because there is a hard limit on how much story can be generated in one go. Here is a focused continuation that pushes the plot forward and sets you up for the final act. The ICU corridor quieted for a moment. No raised voices, no alarms, just the steady beeping of machines and the low hum of hospital air conditioning. Felt like the eye of the storm. Natasha took the chance to duck into the tiny staff room, closed the door, and finally let her shoulders sag. Her hands shook as she poured lukewarm coffee into a paper cup. "You look like a ghost walked over your grave," Jiwoo said from the corner, where she was stabbing a fork into instant noodles. "More like the grave walked into my ward," Natasha muttered. Jiwoo snorted. "Boss still out there? And the police? And the guys who probably put his son in the CT scanner," Natasha said. "I feel like I'm triaging a gang war with sticky notes." Jiwoo slurped noodles thoughtfully. "You could have transferred out after your first week. Most foreign nurses do. They can't stand nights here." "I grew up on nights like this," Natasha said. "Different country. Same smell of fear." Jiwoo looked at her over the rim of her cup. "Then you know they never end clean. Be careful, Tasha. Men like him don't forget people who stand in front of them." "That's what I'm worried about," Natasha said quietly. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "He woke? Is he speaking?" She stared at the screen for a long second, then finally typed back. "He's reacting. Not ready for questions. If you push him now, you could undo everything the surgeons did." The reply was almost instant. "I'm not asking about the docs tonight. Tonight I only need to know one thing. Did he ask to die or to live?" Natasha hesitated, then answered. "He asked not to die. Twice. A beat. Good. That means I still have a son. When my business here is finished, wait for me by the ambulance bay doors. We'll talk about your brother." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "He's dragging you in," Jiwoo said quietly, watching her expression. "Whatever he's offering, remember what it costs to owe a man like that." "I already owe him," Natasha said. "He could have given the order and flattened this place the second his son came in. Instead he signed the consent form and sat down." "Don't romanticize restraint," Jiwoo warned. "Some people only play nice right before they move the knife." A crackle from the intercom saved Natasha from answering. "Natasha to ICU. Patient Kong Minjun is agitated." She tossed the coffee, shoved her phone into her pocket and ran. Minjun thrashed weakly on the bed, eyes wide, trying to rip at his tubes. His heart monitor shrieked in alarm. Easy, easy, Natasha said, grabbing his wrists. You're safe. You're in the hospital. Breathe with the machine. He fought the restraints, panic making him stronger than his condition allowed. A shadow loomed in the doorway. Kang, what's happening? He demanded. He's disoriented, Natasha snapped, not looking away from his son. This is normal after brain surgery. If you step inside and start shouting, it won't help. Kang didn't listen. He stepped to the opposite side of the bed, hands hovering over his son's shoulders. Minjun, he said, voice low and sharp. Look at me. The boy's gaze jerked toward the sound. For a second, fear sharpened his features, then recognition hit and something else broke through: shame. He stilled. That's it, Natasha said more gently. Stay with his voice. Kang bent closer, words in Korean flowing too fast for her to catch everyone. But the tone was clear, cutting, furious, and threaded with something heartbreakingly tender. You think you're a man because you bleed in alleys? He hissed. A man protects his family. He doesn't leave his father to get news from strangers in a hospital corridor. A tear slid from the boy's eye. He tried to speak around the tube, but the only sound was a ragged exhale. Natasha eased a sedative into his fore, watching his heart rate settle, his limbs slacken, his eyelids droop. He needs rest, she said. If you want him to wake up with his brain intact, you let him sleep now. Kang straightened slowly, shoulders tight. For once, he said, we agree. He stepped back toward the door but paused beside her. Ambulance bay, he reminded in a murmur. Don't make me send someone to fetch you. When he left, the room felt bigger and smaller at the same time. Natasha checked the lines twice, more for something to do than because they needed it. Then she stepped into the hall, leaning her head briefly against the cool wall. She could walk away, finish her shift, go home, pretend the text about David had never come. Let the police and the Mafia tear chunks out of each other, while she disappeared into the quiet anonymity of day shifts and ordinary patience. But the image of her brother on that last night floated up. Eyes wide, blood soaking his school uniform, saying, Tasha, tell Mom I didn't do anything. Tell her I was just walking home. No one had ever told her why he had really died. Eyes stinging, she pushed off the wall. Hours later, though it felt like years, the shift board finally flipped from night to early morning. The sky outside the tiny high windows had turned from black to a pale, polluted blue. The ER had slowed into a groggy lull. Natasha handed off her patients, scribbled notes and charts, and signed her initials one last time. Then she walked to the ambulance bay doors. The air outside hit her like a slap, cold and damp, smelling of exhaust and rain. Delivery trucks rumbled in the distance. A tired intern smoked by the dumpster, headphones in, oblivious. Kang stood near the edge of the bay, under the jaundiced glow of a security light. No bodyguards now, just him, coat collar turned up against the chill. You came, he said. I said I would, she replied. He gestured toward the edge of the loading ramp, where a metal bench bolted to the concrete offered a view of the empty parking lot. Sit, he said. It was phrased like an order. She treated it like a suggestion but sat anyway, keeping space between them. For a while neither spoke. You're not going to offer me money? Natasha asked at last, unable to stop the bitter edge in her voice. An envelope, a transfer, a scholarship for my imaginary cousin? He actually smiled. Properly this time, though it was still a small, dangerous thing. If money was what you wanted, you would have hinted by now, he said. You want something much more expensive. Her throat tightened. You don't even know what Your brother, he interrupted calmly. David, yes. The name hit her like a slap. Don't say his. Shot near a convenience store in Lagos, Kang continued, unruffled. Wrong place, wrong time, everyone said. A stray bullet from a disagreement between men no one could name. Natasha's heartbeat roared in her ears. How do you know that? She whispered. He looked out over the parking lot, the city beyond it. Because one of those men worked for a man who worked for me, he said. Or rather, for a branch of my organization. We deal in ports, Nurse Natasha. Imports, exports, routes that cross oceans. Your city and mine are more connected than you think. The world tilted. You're telling me you ordered my brother's death? She said, stunned by the flatness of her own voice. No, he said. I am telling you I know who did. And why the police never arrested anyone. And where the gun went after. She stared at him, breathing hard. Why are you telling me this? She demanded. To hurt me? To see if I'll fall apart in front of you. Because you earned the truth, he said simply. You saved my son when you didn't have to. You stood between him and the law when you could have stepped aside. That is more loyalty than most men who swear oaths to me show. He turned to face her fully. I can give you what your own people could not, he said. Names. Faces. The choice of what to do with them. Her mind raced ahead, imagining a file dropped into her hands. A photo of a man older now but still recognizable. A name she could spit like poison or whisper like a curse in the dark. You could also be lying, she said, voice hoarse. I could, he agreed. But you're too smart not to verify. And I'm too busy to stage an entire Nigerian police record just to impress one nurse. Silence stretched between them again, heavy with possibilities. What do you want in return? She finally asked. Because men like you don't pay debts. You trade them. He smiled without humor. Honesty suits you, he said. What I want is simple. When the time comes, I need someone inside this hospital I can trust more than the men I pay. Someone who will tell me the truth about what's happening to my son. Someone who will speak up if the police try to use his condition against him. In other words, she said, you want a spy in scrubs. I want an advocate, he countered. For him. Not for me. He paused. You can still hate me. You probably should. But you don't hate that boy. And he trusts you already. Natasha thought of Minjun's fingers clutching her wrist, his eyes begging her not to let anyone die because of him. Her chest ached. So I help you protect him from your enemies, she said slowly. And you help me confront one of mine. Yes, Kang said. That is the trade. And if I say no? He shrugged. Then you walk back inside, finish your contract, transfer to a different hospital next year. Eventually, I find another nurse who doesn't flinch when I walk past. Eventually, I find another way to settle the Lagos matter, or I forget it. And you spend the rest of your life wondering if you turned down the only chance you had to look your brother's ghost in the eye. It was a cruel calculus. The worst part was that he was right. Natasha stared at her hands, remembering blood under her fingernails that never seemed to wash off. The way her mother still set an extra place at the table on his birthday. I don't want to become one of your people, she said quietly. I'm not built for that world. Good, Kang said. My world is overcrowded. I need someone who remembers what it is to be clean. She barked out a short, bitter laugh. I don't feel clean tonight. No, he agreed. But you are still on the side of life. That's more than most. The sun was starting to climb, turning the concrete a washed-out gray. A new shift of nurses would be arriving soon. The city would wake properly, and this conversation would become something that lived in the cracks between chart updates and medication rounds. Natasha closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she said, I want proof first. Real proof. Records, not stories. You'll have it, Kang said. And if I think you're using me to cover for something I can't stand behind, if you ask me to falsify anything, or to let someone die who could be saved, then you walk, he said. And you take what I've given you and do whatever you want with it. That will be my punishment for misjudging you. She studied his face, looking for the lie. If it was there, it was buried deep. Fine, she said at last. I'll keep him alive. I'll tell you if anyone tries to use his bed like a prison cell instead of a recovery room. And you'll give me everything you have on David's case. He extended his hand. It was absurd, shaking a devil's hand outside an at sunrise. But she took it anyway. His grip was warm, firm, and disturbingly grateful. Welcome to the family business, Nurse Natasha, he said quietly. You just signed on for a different kind of night shift. She pulled her hand back. If your family gets anyone else killed in my ward, she replied, I will be your biggest problem, not your best ally. He inclined his head, as if accepting terms on a contract. As she walked back toward the sliding doors, the automatic sensors hummed to life. opening the way into the bright, sterile chaos she knew best. Behind her, the sounds of the city rose, the rumble of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, another ambulance turning into the bay. If she were telling it like a story, she'd say, "This is how one night in Seoul turned a nurse into a reluctant accomplice, a mafia boss into a keeper of promises, and a hospital into the battleground where her past and his collided." And somewhere inside, a boy with a dragon on his wrist slept under blinking lights, completely unaware that his fight to live had just rewritten the rest of Natasha's life. Natasha stepped back into the ER just as the first wave of day shift staff flooded in. Bright scrub tops, fresh ponytails, the faint smell of new perfume giving the air a different texture. The chaos of the night blurred into handovers and quick summaries. "Neurosurgery post-op in ICU, stable but critical," she told the incoming nurse who would take Minjun's case. "Watch for any change in pupil response, sudden agitation or drop in GCS. His father is involved. So are the police. Document everything." The day nurse's eyes widened. "You had that kind of night?" "You have no idea," Natasha said. She finished her last notes, logged out of the computer, and finally peeled off her gloves. Her hands smelled like latex and antiseptic. Her shoulders felt like concrete. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. As she passed ICU, she couldn't stop herself from peeking in. Minjun lay where she'd left him, machines tracing his vital signs in luminous lines. His face was softer in the morning light, boyish and unguarded. A police officer sat outside the door, trying to look alert and failing, eyes half closed over a paper cup of vending machine coffee. On the opposite wall, one of Kang's men leaned in a chair, pretending to scroll his phone. Between them stretched a strip of linoleum floor that felt like a demilitarized zone. Natasha's eyes met the officer's for a fraction of a second. He nodded, professional but cool. The guard didn't look up, but she saw his thumb hover over the screen, some silent check-in she wasn't meant to see. She kept walking. At the time clock she punched out, the clack of the machine oddly final. 12 hours, the paper strip declared. Felt like a lifetime. Outside, the dawn had turned fully into morning. Street vendors were opening stalls, buses rumbling past, strangers hurrying to jobs where no one would ask them to choose between the law and a crime lord. Natasha's phone buzzed one more time. No name. Just a file icon and a short message. "For when you wake up. Don't open it on the hospital network." Her stomach flipped. On the bus home, she sat by the window, the file burning a hole in her pocket. She watched the city roll by, neon signs dimming in the daylight, school kids in uniforms, old women carrying grocery bags. A world that had no idea what had happened in one brightly lit corridor overnight. At her small apartment, she locked the door, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the edge of her bed before opening her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the file for a long moment. "This is it," she whispered to the empty room. "Once you look, you can't unknow." She double-clicked. The screen filled with scanned documents, old police reports from Lagos, grainy photos of a bullet-riddled street, a gun in an evidence bag. And there, circled in red on a witness statement, was a name she didn't recognize but instantly hated. An alias. A man. A link between a shooting in Lagos and a smuggling route through Busan. Kang's world mapped over hers. Natasha scrolled, eyes burning, pulse pounding, piecing together a story no one had ever bothered to tell her. A stupid argument. A warning ignored. A shot fired into a crowd. The quick shuffle of money and threats that made the file vanish into some dusty cabinet, until someone like Kong went hunting for leverage. By the time she reached the last page, her hands were shaking. There was a final note, handwritten in neat Korean, translated in small text beneath. "This is the man who held the gun. This is the man the local police were told to leave alone. You asked for truth. What you do with it is your choice." Natasha closed her eyes. David's face flashed behind her eyelids, laughing, annoyed, trying to steal her food at breakfast. Not a ghost anymore, but a boy whose death now had coordinates and a culprit. She could feel the story branching in front of her like a road map. One path. She took this information to the authorities back home. Another. She used it to confront someone in Kang's network, dragging herself deeper into a world she had always sworn to avoid. Somewhere between those was a narrower path. Staying by Minjun's bed, trying to keep him from becoming the kind of man who would one day send files like this to some other grieving sister. Her phone buzzed again. Did you get it? K. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, for the first time since the night started, she replied without overthinking. I got it. We're not done talking. But for now your son is still alive. Let's keep it that way. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Agreed. Natasha dropped the phone onto the bed and lay back, staring at the ceiling. The city outside moved on with its day. Somewhere across town, Kong probably stepped into a black car, back into boardrooms and back alleys, carrying both his son's survival and her new knowledge like twin weapons. In a quiet ICU, a boy with a dragon on his wrist slept through the morning, unaware that his nurse now knew who killed her brother, and that his own future might be the only thing keeping her tethered to the right side of the line. If this were the end of an episode, Natasha thought dimly. This is where the screen would fade on her exhausted face, eyes open, unable to sleep. And the narrator in her head would say, night shifts don't really end when the clock runs out. Sometimes they follow you home, sit on your bed, and hand you the name of the man who ruined your life. The question is, what do you do when the sun comes up, and you're finally holding the truth you begged for? She didn't know yet. But the next time the overhead speaker screamed "Code Blue," and someone whispered, "That's Kang's boy," she knew one thing for sure. She would be the one running toward the sound.